Picture this. You spend 3 decades building a reputation as the ultimate anti-establishment insurgent. You position yourself as the pint-swilling, plain-speaking man of the people who is going to burn down the entire corrupt political system. And then, when you finally have momentum and massive polling numbers, when you're genuinely threatening to reshape British politics, you start welcoming disgraced former chancellors and plotting immigration ministers into your ranks. That's exactly what Nigel Farage is doing right now, and it might be the most spectacular act of political self-sabotage we've seen in years. Because here's the uncomfortable truth. Nigel Farage might be too good at conventional politics to deliver the revolution his voters actually want. Quick favor, if you're loving this analysis, hit that subscribe button and click the bell icon. Over 94% of you watching haven't subscribed yet. It's completely free, takes 1 second, and genuinely helps us keep making this content. Cheers if you did. Right, back to Farage's identity crisis. So let's start with what happened this week, because the symbolism is absolutely perfect. Nigel Farage stood beside Nadhim Zahawi at a press conference and declared it a victory. Zahawi, if you've forgotten, is the former Chancellor who was sacked for tax irregularities, the man who had to pay a penalty to HMRC for what they described as careless errors in his tax affairs, the man who begged unsuccessfully for a Conservative peerage and was rejected. This is the prize recruit that Farage is parading in front of the cameras like he's just signed Ronaldo. Days later, Robert Jenrick was sacked by Kemi Badenoch for plotting to defect to reform. Farage insisted he had, of course, had conversations with Jenrick, but claimed to be very surprised by the timing. Very surprised. Right, because Nigel Farage, the man who has orchestrated political defections and publicity stunts for 30 years, was genuinely shocked that a Conservative MP he'd been talking to decided to jump ship. Pull the other one, Nigel. It's got bells on. For those watching closely, something does not add up. Farage has spent 3 decades positioning himself as the ultimate anti-establishment insurgent, the outsider, the disruptor, the man who was going to take a wrecking ball to the entire rotten edifice of Westminster politics. Yet here he is, eagerly welcoming the very embodiment of that establishment into his ranks. It's like Che Guevara deciding that what the revolution really needs is a few experienced accountants from the old regime. Now here's where things get really interesting. The latest MRP projections, those sophisticated polling models that try to predict individual constituency results, show Reform winning 381 seats. 381 seats. That would be an absolute earthquake. Labour collapsing, the Conservatives fighting for relevance, and across coastal England and the former industrial heartlands, Reform sweeping all before it. These are numbers that would represent the most dramatic realignment of British politics since the rise of the Labour Party itself. But scratch beneath those numbers and you find something genuinely revealing. Reform voters are not motivated by incremental policy changes or clever technical solutions to complex problems. When asked about their priorities, 90% name immigration as their top concern. 90%. That's not a political preference, that's a movement built on a single burning issue. And these voters do not want the system managed better. They want the system shaken up, torn down, fundamentally transformed. They are not looking for competent administration, they are looking for revolution. This is where Farage's instincts as a political professional may be leading him astray. His decision to welcome Zahawi and court Jenrick makes perfect sense through a conventional Westminster lens. He needs experienced hands who understand how government works, people who have sat in cabinet meetings, who know how Whitehall operates, who can navigate the machinery of state. These are the calculations of a serious political operator preparing for power. Strategic, sensible, entirely rational. But here's the problem. Many Reform voters did not sign up for a serious political operation. They signed up for a revolution. They did not queue for hours to see Nigel at rallies because they wanted a slightly better managed version of the same old system. They came because they believed he would tear that system down and build something fundamentally different. And this is where the comparison to Trump becomes absolutely crucial. When Trump assembled his administration in 2024, he did not parade a procession of establishment Republicans to demonstrate his credentials. Nobody knew who most of Trump's cabinet picks were before they got their jobs. RFK Jr. running Health and Human Services? Who saw that coming? Tulsi Gabbard as Director of National Intelligence? Completely out of left field. Elon Musk running a government efficiency commission? Absolutely bonkers by conventional standards. But here's the thing, it did not matter. Trump's appeal was not built on reassuring voters with familiar faces and conventional choices. It was built on the promise that he would smash the existing structure entirely. Trump understood something that Farage appears to be forgetting. Voters who have lost faith in the system do not want you to staff it with slightly different people. They want you to burn it down and build something completely new. The Liberal Democrats learned this lesson the hard way, and their experience is incredibly instructive. For years they benefited from being neither Labour nor Tory, winning seats simply by being different, by being the alternative, by promising change. They built themselves up as the fresh option, the party that would do politics differently. And then, in 2010, they got into government in coalition with the Conservatives. They made compromises. They became part of the establishment. They started defending decisions they would have attacked from opposition. And their voters absolutely annihilated them at the next election, because those voters did not want the Lib Dems to become competent junior partners in a Conservative government. They wanted them to be different. That's the charitable interpretation. The less charitable interpretation is that students have learned to give the socially acceptable answer when asked about free speech in the abstract, but when faced with concrete situations involving people and parties they actually dislike, their commitment to that principle evaporates faster than water on a hot stove. Now, to be fair to universities, the government has been taking steps to address these issues. The Office for Students was handed more powers to examine complaints from speakers, students, and staff regarding free speech infringements. In August of last year, new rules were unveiled binding universities to actively support academic freedom and ensure students can freely engage in discussions without fears over censorship. The regulations also scrapped non-disclosure agreements intended to silence campus misconduct victims, which is genuinely positive. If a university is accused of suppressing free speech, the Office for Students now has authority to investigate and take action. The University of Sussex was hit with a £585,000 fine over failure to uphold free speech just last year. So there are consequences now, real financial consequences, for universities that don't protect open debate. But here's the problem. You can mandate free speech from the top down. You can threaten fines and investigations. You can create all the policies and procedures you want. But if students themselves don't value free expression, if they genuinely believe that banning people they disagree with is acceptable or even virtuous, then no amount of regulatory oversight will fix the underlying cultural problem. This isn't about university administrators being too restrictive. This is about students themselves demanding restrictions. That's much harder to solve because you're fighting against attitudes and beliefs, not just institutional policies. Let's think about why this might be happening, because understanding the cause is essential to finding solutions. One factor is undoubtedly social media, which has created environments where people can curate their information diet to include only views they already agree with, where disagreement is often met with blocking or muting rather than engagement, where pile-ons and public shaming are used to enforce conformity. Students raised in that environment might genuinely not understand the value of encountering challenging ideas because they've never had to seriously engage with them. Another factor is probably the increasing politicization of everything. When politics stops being about competing visions for society and starts being about good people versus evil people, it becomes much easier to justify silencing the evil people because you're not just disagreeing with them, you're protecting society from harm. That's a dangerous mindset because it treats political opponents as enemies to be defeated rather than citizens to be persuaded. There's also potentially an element of risk aversion. This generation of students has grown up being told that words can be violence, that certain ideas are literally dangerous, that exposure to the wrong viewpoints can cause psychological harm. If you genuinely believe that, then banning speakers isn't censorship, it's safeguarding, it's protecting vulnerable people from harm. The problem is that ideas, even offensive ones, aren't actually violence. They might be uncomfortable, they might be upsetting, they might challenge deeply held beliefs, but that's not the same as physical danger. We've conflated emotional discomfort with actual harm, and the result is a generation that thinks protection from discomfort is a right, rather than encountering challenging ideas being a necessary part of education and growth. But here's what really gets me about this survey, and it's the contradiction at its heart. These students are at university, supposedly the pinnacle of education, places where critical thinking is meant to be developed, where people learn to analyze arguments, evaluate evidence, and form independent judgments. And yet, significant numbers of them don't trust themselves or their peers to hear certain political views without being corrupted or damaged by them. What does that say about their confidence in their own beliefs? If your worldview is so fragile that it cannot withstand exposure to Reform UK or Labour politicians giving a talk, maybe the problem isn't the speakers, maybe it's that your beliefs haven't been tested and refined through genuine intellectual challenge. There's also something deeply patronizing about the attitude underlying these bans. It's essentially saying, I'm sophisticated enough to hear these ideas without being influenced by them, but other people aren't, so we need to protect them.